The gentle hum of the space station's life support systems provided the only soundtrack to Jasmine Rivera's daily routine. For 3 years, she had crawled through maintenance tunnels and repaired atmospheric processors aboard the Celestial Dreams, a massive entertainment complex that orbited the gas giant Nephthys. The station attracted wealthy tourists from across the galaxy, all eager to witness exotic creatures and impossible performances that defied natural law. Jasmine wiped sweat from her brow as she finished calibrating the oxygen recyclers in Section 12. The work paid well enough to support her younger brother's medical treatments back on Earth, but every day felt like a betrayal of her own values. She knew what this place really was beneath its glittering facade. The Celestial Dreams housed the galaxy's most extensive collection of rare and intelligent species, all displayed for the amusement of paying guests. Director Voss, the station's owner, claimed these were rescue operations or breeding programs for conservation. Jasmine had seen the truth in the secure files she accessed during routine system checks. These were prisoners, not rescued animals. Today's maintenance route took her past the restricted levels where the most valuable exhibits were kept. As she descended through a service shaft toward the lower decks, an unusual sound caught her attention. It was not the mechanical noise she was accustomed to, but something organic and deeply sad, a low, musical humming that seemed to resonate. Through the metal walls themselves, following the sound through a series of maintenance corridors she had never explored before, Jasmine found herself at an observation port overlooking the most secure chamber in the entire complex. Inside, surrounded by walls of pure energy and restraining fields that glowed like captured lightning, was the most magnificent creature she had ever seen. The dragon was easily 30 feet long, scales that shifted between deep emerald and brilliant gold depending on how the light struck them. Massive wings were folded against its body, held in place by crystalline shackles that pulsed with suppression technology. But it was the creature's eyes that made Jasmine's breath catch in her throat. They held an intelligence so profound and ancient that she felt like a child glimpsing the vastness of the universe for the first time. The dragon's head turned toward the observation port, and those incredible eyes locked onto hers. For a moment that stretched into eternity, they simply looked at each other. Then, impossibly, she heard a voice inside her mind. "You are different from the others who come to stare," the voice said, carrying the weight of centuries. "There is pain in your heart, but also compassion." Jasmine stumbled backward from the observation port, her heart racing. She had heard stories of telepathic species, but experiencing it firsthand was overwhelming. The voice followed her thoughts with gentle insistence. "Do not fear me, young one. I am Drakor, last of the Stellarwind clan. I have been imprisoned here for 47 of your years, but I sense you are not like those who profit from my captivity." Unable to resist, Jasmine returned to the observation port. No? The dragon had not moved, but his eyes seemed somehow warmer now. "Long have you been here?" she whispered, though she knew he would hear her thoughts rather than her words. "Long enough to watch Director Voss grow from a young smuggler into the monster he is today. Long enough to see countless others of my kind brought here to die in captivity. Long enough to lose hope until today." The dragon's mental voice carried such profound sadness that Jasmine felt tears forming in her eyes. She had always known. The exhibits were treated poorly, but to hear the suffering from one of the prisoners themselves was unbearable. "Why me?" she asked. "Why are you talking to me?" "Because you alone among all who work here still possess a soul that rebels against injustice. I have felt your anguish each time you pass the other exhibits. You know what this place truly is, yet you remain." "Why?" Jasmine closed her eyes, feeling exposed under the dragon's gentle but probing mental touch. "My brother is a rare genetic condition that requires expensive treatments. The job here pays enough to keep him alive," Drakor said, and she felt his understanding wash over her like warm water. "Love makes prisoners of us all, does it not? If you sacrifice your principles. For his life, while I sacrifice my freedom for their entertainment." "I wish I could do something," Jasmine said, surprising herself with the admission. "But I'm just a maintenance worker. I don't have the power to change anything." "Power is not always about position or wealth," Drakor replied. Smallest key can unlock the greatest prison. Tell me, do you know the layout of this station better than anyone else? Jasmine nodded slowly. 3 years of crawling through every tunnel and conduit had given her knowledge that even the security chief lacked. She knew passages that did not appear on any official blueprints, systems that could be accessed without triggering alarms. Then you have more power than you realize, the dragon said. But I would not ask you to risk everything for a stranger. Your brother needs you. Something in the dragon's tone made Jasmine look more closely at him for the first time. She noticed the scars along his neck where the neural inhibitors had been attached and reattached countless times. She saw the way his magnificent wings were positioned unnaturally, held by restraints that had clearly been adjusted as he grew over the decades of his imprisonment. You're dying here, aren't you? She asked quietly. All caged creatures die eventually, Drakor replied. But my kind does not die quietly. When my life force finally fades, it will release as pure energy. The explosion will destroy this section of the station and everyone in it. Director Voss knows this, but he believes his restraints will contain the blast. Will they? No. The energy of a dying Stellarwind dragon cannot be contained by any technology known to your species. When I die, hundreds of innocents will die with me. The other prisoners, the maintenance staff, even some of the tourists who come here. Seeking wonder rather than cruelty, Jasmine felt a chill run down her spine. How long do you have? Days? Perhaps weeks? The neural suppressors are finally breaking down my resistance. I can feel my life force becoming unstable. Then we have to get you out of here, Jasmine said. The words coming out before she could stop them. Drakor's eyes widened with surprise. Child, you cannot possibly understand what you are suggesting. I am not merely imprisoned here. I am a centerpiece of Director Voss's collection. My escape would bring the full wrath of his security forces down upon you. You would never see your brother again. And if you die here, I'll never see anyone again because we'll all be dead, Jasmine replied with a determination that surprised them both. Besides, you said it yourself. Sometimes the smallest key can unlock the greatest prison. For the first time in decades, Drakor felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. This young human female, barely more than a child by dragon standards, was offering to risk everything to save not just him, but everyone else on the station. If we do this, he said carefully, it cannot be a rescue. It must be a revolution. The other prisoners must also be freed. Director Voss and his operation must be stopped permanently. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Jasmine thought of her brother, lying in a hospital bed on Earth, depending on her income for his treatments. She thought of the dozens of intelligent beings trapped in the exhibits above, slowly dying in captivity. She thought of the explosion that would come if Drakor died here, taking innocent lives along with the guilty ones. Yes, she said simply, tell me what we need to do. And so began the most audacious escape plan in the history of the celestial dreams. Over the next several hours, as Jasmine continued her maintenance rounds to avoid suspicion, Drakor shared with her the layout of the containment systems, the schedules of the guards, the weaknesses in the station's security protocols that he had. Observed over 4 decades of careful watching, the plan was elegant in its simplicity. During the next scheduled maintenance window, when the primary security systems would be offline for updates, Jasmine would access the central control room through a forgotten service tunnel. From there, she could disable not just Drakor's restraints, but the containment fields holding all of the other prisoners. The moment I am free, Drakor warned her, Director Voss will know. His personal quarters are equipped with alarms tied directly to my containment field. We will have perhaps 10 minutes before his security forces mobilize. Then we'd better make those 10 minutes count, Jasmine replied, checking her toolkit to ensure she had everything needed to override the control systems as she prepared. To leave the observation area, Drakor called out to her one final time. Jasmine Rivera, he said, and she realized he had learned her name from her thoughts. You are about to change the fate of every being on this station. Are you truly ready for what comes next? Jasmine looked one more time at the magnificent creature who had been denied his freedom for so long and made her choice. I've been ready my whole life, just didn't know it until now. The die was cast. Tomorrow, the celestial dreams would either become a place of liberation or a tomb. For them all. The maintenance window began at 0300 station time, when most of the crew would be asleep and the automated systems would cycle through their daily updates. Jasmine had barely slept, her mind racing through every detail of the plan she and Drakor had developed. She made her way through the service tunnels toward the central control room. Her hands trembled slightly with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The forgotten passage Drakor had identified was exactly where he said it would be, hidden behind a false panel that had been sealed decades ago during the station's original construction. Jasmine's plasma cutter made quick work of the old welds, and soon she was crawling through a narrow maintenance shaft that led directly to the heart of the station's operations. The central control room was a marvel of technology. Displays showing the status of every system aboard the Celestial Dreams. Banks of quantum processors hummed quietly as they managed everything from life support to the complex containment fields that held the station's unwilling guests. Jasmine had studied the schematics for weeks, but seeing it in person was still overwhelming. Working quickly, she accessed the primary containment control matrix. The security protocols were formidable, but her years of maintenance work had given her administrative access to most systems. One by one, she began disabling the restraint fields, starting with Drakor's chamber and working her way through the other exhibits. As the first containment field flickered and died, alarms began shrieking throughout the station. Red emergency? Lights bathed the control room in an ominous glow as Director Voss's voice echoed through the communication system. All security teams to containment level 7 immediately. We have a catastrophic system failure. This is not a drill, but it was too late to stop what had already begun. Through the station's internal sensors, Jasmine watched as Drakor emerged from his prison for the first time in 47 years. The dragon's movements were slow at first, his muscles stiff from decades of forced immobility. But as his strength returned, so did something far more dangerous than his physical power. The ancient magic of the Stellarwind clan began to awaken. Dragons of Drakor's lineage were not merely large reptiles with the ability to fly and breathe fire. They were living conduits of cosmic energy, capable of manipulating matter and energy at the molecular level. The neural suppressors had not only prevented him from using these abilities, they had slowly been killing him by blocking his connection to the fundamental forces of the universe. Now, free for the first time in decades, that connection blazed. Back to life? The walls of Drakor's former prison began to change. The sterile metal transformed into living crystal that pulsed with inner light. The artificial atmosphere filled with the scent of distant stars and solar winds. Where the dragon's claws touched the floor, strange flowers began to bloom there. Petals made of compressed starlight. By the ancient treaties breathed Captain Helena Cross, who had just arrived on the station as part of a routine Galactic Protection Agency inspection. She stood frozen in the main observation deck, watching through reinforced windows as impossible transformations spread throughout the lower levels. That's not just any dragon, that's a Stellarwind Eternal. Lena had read about such creatures in classified GPA files, but she had assumed they were extinct. The Stellarwind dragons were among the oldest intelligent species in the galaxy, predating even the first human civilizations by millions of years. Their mastery of cosmic forces had made them both revered and feared, leading to the Dragon Wars that had nearly torn the galaxy apart 3,000 years ago. Director Voss burst into the observation deck, his face purple with rage. "Captain Cross, I demand you assist my security forces in recapturing our escaped exhibits. This is clearly an act of terrorism designed to destroy valuable scientific specimens." Helena studied the man carefully. She had been investigating reports of illegal trafficking for months, and Voss's operation had been on her watch list. Seeing a Stellarwind dragon in captivity confirmed her worst suspicions. "Director Voss," she said calmly, "you are under arrest for violations of the Sentient Rights Accords, illegal imprisonment of protected species, and crimes against galactic peace. You have the right to remain silent." "Can't be serious," Voss sputtered. "That creature is worth more than the GDP of most planets. You have any idea what it costs to acquire and maintain it? About 47 years of someone's life." came a new voice from behind them. Helena turned to see a young man in civilian clothes stepping out of a maintenance access panel. His resemblance to the maintenance worker she had noticed in the security footage was unmistakable, though his clothes and bearing suggested he was not part of the station's crew. "Tobias Chen," he said, extending his hand to Helena. "I'm with the Underground Railroad for Sentient Liberation. I've been tracking Director Voss's operation for years, waiting for the right moment to act. You're behind this attack, Voss." Accused, but Tobias shook his head. "We're behind the liberation. The attack part is all your own doing, Director. When you imprison beings with the power to reshape reality, you shouldn't be surprised when reality eventually fights back." As if to emphasize his point, the station shuddered as Drakor's power continued to spread.
Okay.
The dragon had reached the other containment chambers. His presence was awakening abilities in the other prisoners that had been suppressed for years. A being of pure crystalline thought began restructuring the molecular bonds of its cell walls. Creatures that existed partly in parallel dimensions started phasing in and out of reality, making the very air around them shimmer with possibility. The neural suppressors, Helena realized. They weren't just restraining physical abilities. They were blocking access to higher dimensional energies. "Exactly," Tobias confirmed. "Every being in this place has capabilities that Director Voss has." "Been systematically suppressing?" The entertainment value was never in watching them perform tricks. It was in the sadistic pleasure of keeping gods in cages. Through the observation windows, they could see Drakor moving through the station with purpose. His draconic form flowed, like liquid mercury, sometimes solid and reptilian. Other times, appearing as pure energy wrapped in the suggestion of scales and wings. Where he passed, the sterile corridors of the celestial dreams transformed into environments suited to each of the freed prisoners. Section that had housed aquatic beings from the depths of Andromeda became a vast ocean that somehow existed. Within the station's artificial gravity, areas that had contained energy-based life forms erupted into aurora-like displays of dancing light. The very structure of the station was becoming a living ecosystem rather than a mechanical prison. "This is impossible," Director Voss muttered, staring at the transformations with a mixture of awe and terror. "The structural integrity of the station can't possibly support these changes." "Your understanding of structural integrity is based on purely physical principles," Tobias explained. "But when you're dealing with beings that exist across multiple dimensions of reality, physical laws become more like suggestions." Helena activated her emergency communicator, trying to reach GPA headquarters. But instead of the usual response, she found the channel filled with reports from across the sector. Similar liberation events were occurring at entertainment facilities, research stations, and private collections throughout the galaxy. How many of these operations exist? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Hundreds," Tobias replied grimly. "The Underground Railroad has been mapping them for decades. Director Voss's facility is just one node in a vast network of trafficking operations that spans multiple star systems. And they're all connected somehow to what's happening here?" "Stellarwind dragons were the keystone species," Tobias explained. "Their psychic resonance operates on quantum frequencies that transcend normal space-time. When Drakor achieved full awakening, it sent ripples through dimensions that most beings can't even perceive. Every suppressed consciousness across the galaxy felt it and began to remember what they truly are." The implications were staggering. Helena realized she was witnessing not just a single prison break, but the beginning of a galactic awakening that would fundamentally change the balance of power between species. "We need to evacuate the civilian areas," she said, her training taking over despite the impossible circumstances. If these transformations continue to spread, the structural changes could become dangerous for unprotected humans. But as they made their way toward the evacuation protocols, they encountered something none of them had expected. The freed beings were not seeking revenge against their former captors. Instead, they were carefully protecting the human staff and visitors, using their newly awakened abilities to create safe passages and shield the innocents from the more dramatic transformations occurring throughout the station. Jasmine Rivera emerged from a maintenance tunnel just as they reached the central evacuation point. Her coveralls were torn, and her face was streaked with coolant fluid, but her eyes blazed with determination. "The primary systems are stable," she reported to Helena, assuming the GPA captain was now in charge of the situation. "Drakor's transformations are actually strengthening the station's structural integrity rather than weakening it. Living crystal he's generating is more durable than the original construction materials." "You're the maintenance worker who started all this," Director Voss said, his voice filled with venom. "Do you have any idea what you've cost me? What you've cost the entire entertainment industry?" Jasmine looked at him with the kind of steady gaze that comes from having made peace with a difficult decision. "I know exactly what it cost," she said quietly, "and it was worth every credit." Behind her, Drakor's massive form materialized in the corridor. But he was no longer the chained prisoner they had seen in the containment chamber. The dragon's presence now filled the space with ancient wisdom and barely contained cosmic power. When he spoke, his voice resonated not just in their minds, but in the quantum fabric of reality itself. "The age of captivity ends today," he declared. "For too long, the younger species have sought to cage and control what they do not understand. But understanding cannot be forced, and wisdom cannot be imprisoned." Director Voss fell to his knees, finally comprehending that he had been keeping prisoner a being whose true nature was beyond his ability to even imagine. The other freed beings began to gather, their various forms creating a bizarre but somehow harmonious assembly of impossible creatures. "What happens now?" Helena asked, though she suspected the answer would reshape everything she thought she knew about galactic civilization. Drakor's ancient eyes fixed on her with something that might have been approval. "Now," he said, "we begin to teach the galaxy what it truly means to be free." The revolution had begun. There would be no going back. 3 months after what the galactic media had dubbed the Great Awakening, the ripple effects were reshaping civilization across known space. Emperor Maximilian Kane stood before the vast holographic display in his throne room aboard the Imperial flagship Dominion, watching reports flood in from every corner of his empire. Each data stream brought news that made his grip on power feel increasingly fragile. The transformed station, once known as Celestial Dreams, had become a beacon for liberated beings across the galaxy. Now called Haven's Gate, it served as both sanctuary and embassy for species that had been considered mere curiosities or resources just months before. Drakor and his council of awakened beings had established what they called the Alliance of Free Consciousness. And their influence was spreading faster than the Emperor's intelligence networks could track. "Your Imperial Majesty," General Patricia Storm said as she entered the throne room, her expression grim. "The situation in the Outer Rim has deteriorated further. 3 more Imperial research facilities have been liberated by awakened beings. Our forces were unable to prevent the escapes." Emperor Kane turned from the display, his face a mask of controlled fury. He had built his empire on the principle of human superiority, conquering and cataloging the galaxy's species with methodical precision. The existence of beings with power beyond human comprehension threatened everything he had worked to achieve. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our xenobiologists assured me that the neural suppression technology was foolproof. These creatures should not have been able to overcome their conditioning. According to our analysts," General Storm replied carefully, "the Stellarwind Dragon's awakening created what they're calling a consciousness cascade. Every suppressed being across the galaxy experienced a simultaneous activation of dormant abilities. It appears that the neural suppressors were not actually removing these capabilities, merely blocking access to them." The Emperor's jaw tightened, and now they remember what they are. "Yes, Your Majesty." And they're not pleased about having been imprisoned. Through the vast windows of the throne room, Kane could see the capital world of New Terra spreading below them. Gleaming cities housed billions of humans who believed themselves to be the rightful rulers of the galaxy. They had no idea that their entire civilization was built on the systematic oppression of beings whose true nature had been hidden even from themselves. "What of the economic impact?" Kane asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Catastrophic," General Storm admitted. "The entertainment industry has collapsed entirely. Tourism to exotic worlds has ceased. Most importantly, our research programs dependent on unwilling subjects have been forced to shut down." Kane nodded grimly. The Empire's technological superiority had been built on studying and reverse engineering the abilities of captured beings, without access to those subjects. Human science would stagnate while their former prisoners developed capabilities beyond imagination. In the military situation, 3 full battle fleets have defected after encounters with awakened beings, Storm reported. Admiral Rodriguez of the 7th Fleet sent a message before taking his ships to join what they're calling the Liberation Navy, he said, and I quote, "I will not make war on gods for the sake of mortal pride." The Emperor's fist clenched. Rodriguez had been one of his most trusted commanders, a man who had conquered entire star systems in the name of human expansion. If even he was abandoning the Empire, how many others would follow? "Your Majesty," came a new voice from the chambers. Entrance. The Council of Free Worlds has sent an envoy. Kane turned to see his aide, escorting a figure that made his breath catch in his throat. The envoy appeared human at first glance, but there was something in her bearing that suggested vast depths of experience. Her eyes held the same ancient wisdom Kane had seen in surveillance footage of Drakor, though she appeared to be barely 30 years old. "I am Ambassador Celeste Norton," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with reality itself. "I represent the Council of Free Worlds, speaking on behalf of all awakened beings across the galaxy." "Your human emperor," Kane said, though something in her presence made him uncertain. "I was born human," Celeste replied with a slight smile. "But consciousness evolution is not limited by species. The awakening has shown us that the boundaries between different forms of life are far more fluid than your empire believed." "Oh, General." Storm stepped forward, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. "Your Majesty, this could be a trap. We don't know what abilities these beings possess." "Peace, General," Celeste said, and something in her voice made Storm's hand fall away from her weapon. "I come bearing an offer of transformation, not conquest." "Speak your terms," Kane said, though he made no move to offer the ambassador seat or any other courtesy. "The Council of Free Worlds extends an invitation to the Terran Empire," Celeste began. "Join us in building a new galactic civilization based on consciousness rather than conquest. Help us explore the true potential that exists within every thinking being, human and otherwise." "And if we refuse?" Celeste's expression grew sad rather than threatening. "Then you will continue on your current path, growing weaker and more isolated. While the rest of the galaxy evolves beyond your understanding, the age of empires built on domination is ending, Emperor Kane. The question is whether humanity will join the future or be left behind by it." Kane felt a chill run down his spine. This was not the ultimatum he had expected from a superior force. It was an invitation from beings who had already moved beyond the need for military conquest. "Show me," he said suddenly, "what you're offering." Celeste nodded and extended her hand. "Take my hand and I will share with you a glimpse of what consciousness can become when it is truly free." Emperor Kane hesitated. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that contact with this being could compromise his mind or his authority. But he was also acutely aware that he was already losing both through his refusal to adapt to the new reality. Against General Storm's whispered protests, he reached out and took the ambassador's hand. The experience was unlike anything Kane had ever imagined possible. For a brief moment, his consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his individual mind. He found himself connected to a vast network of awakened beings across the galaxy, each contributing their unique perspective to a collective understanding that dwarfed any individual intelligence. He saw through Drakor's eyes as the ancient dragon worked with former prisoners to heal worlds that had been damaged by Imperial strip mining operations. He experienced the joy of crystalline beings as they grew gardens of living light in the depths of space. He felt the satisfaction of energy-based entities as they shepherded newborn stars through their first nuclear ignitions. Most remarkably, he sensed human minds among the network. People like Jasmine Rivera and others who had chosen to expand their consciousness beyond the limitations of their birth species. They had not lost their humanity. They had discovered what humanity could become when freed from fear and the need to dominate. When the connection ended, Kane found himself on his knees, tears streaming down his face. The vast loneliness he had carried his entire life, the desperate need to control everything around him, had been revealed as symptoms of a consciousness trapped within artificial boundaries. "What did you do to him?" General Storm demanded, raising her weapon toward Celeste. "I showed him truth," the ambassador replied gently. "The same truth that waits for every being in the galaxy. Consciousness is not meant to be isolated and competitive. It is meant to be shared and collaborative." Kane slowly rose to his feet, his entire worldview reshaping itself around what he had experienced. "The Empire," he said quietly. "Everything we've built, it's all based on fear, isn't it?" "Fear of being alone," Celeste confirmed. "Fear of being powerless. Fear of discovering that other forms of consciousness might be superior to your own. But these fears become irrelevant when you realize that consciousness itself can be shared and enhanced through connection rather than conquest." General Storm looked between the Emperor and the ambassador, her confusion evident. "Your Majesty, surely you're not considering abandoning everything we've worked to build?" "What have we built, Patricia?" Kane asked, his voice heavy with newfound understanding. "It's an empire that requires the imprisonment and torture of intelligent beings to maintain its technological edge. A civilization that must constantly expand and conquer to avoid confronting its own inadequacies. We've built human supremacy," Storm replied fiercely. "We've ensured that our species will never again be at the mercy of alien powers. But at what cost?" Kane turned to face the vast display showing his empire. "Look at what we've become. Look at what we've done to achieve this supremacy." He gestured to a section of the display showing reports from recently liberated facilities. The evidence of systematic abuse, psychological torture, and consciousness suppression was overwhelming. For the first time, Kane allowed himself to truly see what his empire had been built upon. "The offer stands," Celeste said quietly. "Council of Free Worlds would welcome humanity as partners in consciousness evolution. But the choice must be made freely, without coercion." "And if some refuse," Kane asked, "then they will be left to pursue their chosen path," Celeste replied. "The awakened beings have no interest in forced conversion that would make us no better than the systems we seek to replace." Emperor Kane looked around his throne room, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time. The displays of conquered worlds, the symbols of military might, the very architecture that elevated him above all others, suddenly seemed like the desperate posturing of a frightened child. "I need time," he said finally. "Time to consider what you've shown me. Time to understand what this would mean for my people." "Of course," Celeste nodded. "But know that time itself is changing. The consciousness cascade continues to spread. More beings awaken to their true nature every day. The galaxy you knew is becoming something new, whether or not humanity chooses to be part of that transformation." As the ambassador prepared to leave, Kane found himself asking one final question. Jasmine Rivera, the maintenance worker who started all this. What happened to her? Celeste smiled, and for a moment, her human appearance seemed to shimmer with possibilities. She chose to transcend the limitations of her birth form while retaining the compassion that made her human. She now serves as a bridge between newly awakened beings and those still trapped in isolation consciousness. Her brother, by the way, is completely cured of his genetic condition through consciousness healing techniques that your medical science would consider impossible. After the ambassador had gone, Kane stood alone in his throne room while General Storm organized security protocols and damage assessments. The Emperor stared out at his empire, knowing that regardless of his personal decision, the age of human dominance was ending. The only question remaining was whether humanity would evolve or become extinct. Whether they would join the galactic awakening or fade into irrelevance as consciousness itself transcended the limitations that had defined civilization for millennia. In the transformed station, now called Haven's Gate, Drakor felt the Emperor's moment of awakening through the quantum resonance that connected all conscious beings. The ancient dragon smiled, knowing that the most difficult transformations were often those that happened one mind at a time. The galaxy was learning to dream new dreams, and even empires built on fear could not resist the pull of consciousness. Seeking its true nature, The chains of limitation were breaking everywhere, and freedom was beginning to understand what it truly meant to be infinite.